problem to think about, and it has a lot of different nuance that I want to put down there and some questions. It also gives a good example of seeing pro and con of the argument, taking the argument apart from either side, and then there's some quotes on there that I thought would be useful in thinking about. So we'll start today just by trying to explain why we care. Right? So what would we, how would we give an example of what we're offended by when an economist is homo economicus, right? When it's just atomistic, contain only a single person. So we could be an example. My friend Dan used to live in New Orleans. There was a really good Italian sort of bakery that had cannoli. Right? And he wanted to go get the cannoli, so he would go there every day or once a week or something like that. He'd go into this bakery and buy a whole bunch of cannoli. So one day he's looking at the case, and there's only 2 dozen left, and he's like, I'll just buy the rest of them. But it's a really long line, and when he gets up there, there's still left, and he buys them all. The guy behind him goes, hey man, can you leave one cannoli for me? And he goes, no. Right? You snooze, you lose. Right? But you should have gotten here earlier. How many people think my friend Dan has the right response? He wanted all 24. He bought all 24.
How long does it take?
All right, like 10 minutes.
23 is too weird of a number.
Yeah, you don't want to walk out of the store. Even the store owner, I don't know if this changes your opinion, but even the store owner is saying, hey man, can you just like, let him buy the last one? And he's been waiting for a while too. And so when the store owner starts pleading, most people would be like, okay. But he's like, no, the rules of the game are you show up first, you get what's for offer, right? That's how markets work. Right? So if your intuitions tell you that my friend Dan is right, that as long as he's willing to suffer the guy like saying something unnice to him as he's leaving the shop with a big bundle of the white package with all the cannoli in it, then he hasn't violated any rule. Right? So the question is Adam Smith such a person? Does he defend the market structure that way? Are there ways to see the market as having no appeal to justice outside of the sort of price mechanism or contracts? And I'll make the argument that that's not the case, and that will mean that I have to defend the fact that there's a consistency between the two books, Theory of Moral Sentiments and Wealth of Nations. And so at the end of last class, we presented on Jacob Viner, who finished papers on that list of papers, who says there actually is an inconsistency there. So if you want to read that opinion, you've got some sources there as well. I'll try to do my best to frame the problem, but I want to start from the idea of just saying, is Adam Smith a economicus in the Wealth of Nations, even if I've convinced you that he's talking about a social animal in Theory of Moral Sentiments? Is there directly a connection between these two things? All right. So TMS is social, Wealth of Nations is economicus. That's the problem. All right. I don't think Smith is guilty of this, but I have to make that case. All right. So the way that I've tried to set this up is to say, look, you can either sort of see Smith in Wealth of Nations as being basically Mandevillean, and in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, at least concerned with the same type of problem that Rousseau was concerned about, which is the innate personality of man. All right, who knows Rousseau? What do you guys know about Rousseau? Jean-Jacques? Political science majors? All right. So Rousseau is famous for winning an essay contest. And the essay contest was, is sort of technology and the modern society advancing mankind, right? And he took the negative, right? So his essay was to explain how modern society was actually corrupting and showed a devolution of humanity rather than an evolution. Okay? And one of the main parts of this commentary was that people were becoming sort of less social. Now, he draws on his essay some inspiration from what he would call the noble savages, what he means by the people in the Americas that were uncivilized and seemed to function with more sociability. Right? The tribal setup, the functioning in tribes, running around naked on the island of Hispaniola, not having gross inequality, all those things seemed really attractive. Does that make sense? So that if this was the state of life in some prior period, we have lost something really desirable about the way society was organized. So if you are hanging out in Geneva, and sometimes you go to Paris, you're taking a carriage, you're looking out the window of your carriage, what kind of things do you see? You're fairly affluent in a period of time where there's pretty severe poverty. You're seeing people working really hard, they're covered in dirt. How many people have seen Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail? How do you know he's a king? It doesn't have any dirt on it. Dirt. So everybody else has not any, health, working really hard, in the muck, all that kind of stuff. Gets into town, what does he see? Deplorable conditions, people living in close quarters, all that kind of stuff. Then he goes to the salons of all these people that think he's great because he wrote this essay, and they treat him really nice, and they have all these manners and everything. They actually cover their faces with lead paint because they don't know that was bad. But the idea there was to look as like you've never been out in the sun. Like the more you look like a vampire, the less you've actually had any work in your life, which was considered desirable. So these were things that they were trying to do, and he called them out on it, right? So trying to understand how a society could advance to something like that with comparable sort of tribal utopia as he understood it. I don't think he ever went to the New World. He was writing about the descriptions. He thought that we developed the ability through technology to rationalize sort of gross injustice, and that we probably shouldn't do that. Okay? So taking that sort of claim of sociability seriously, Smith is writing, having known and read Rousseau. Rousseau, I think, he had himself in trouble having come to Scotland for a while, lived in Peter, you're not doing well. I think there's a biography of Rousseau's dog. Didn't treat him very well. All right, so what Smith is going to do is try to build in this sociability, but he's going to take a different tack than Rousseau, right? So he's trying to balance, I think, between these types of visions. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a second. But what I think he's building on here is an egalitarian idea. Now he's going to take that everyone's selfish. It's a different sort of description of humanity than Rousseau, just saying, look, everybody is selfish. This is what we are. But we're never so selfish that we're completely animistic. That was my claim, that no, Smith's description of markets and mankind could never evolve to the point where we're just little islands, because that would go against everything you've said in theory of moral sentence, require a separate justification, which isn't in law conditions. He says we depend on relationships with each other, and so then if we're going to understand the union of these two parts, we have to understand economics only through the lens of what it does to reform and perfect relationships. This is going to be an extremely optimistic view of markets. Now remember, after this test next Wednesday, we're going to critique the sort of body, upward and onward, economics solve all of those problems. But I'm giving you a theory with Adam Smith is things got a lot better through market interactions. It's extremely optimistic. It's by design. So this is strong optimism about the market. So how would I explain this? So if I go into the market and I want to buy something, so Smith gives us an example of all the nations of the butcher, the brewer, and the baker. And that's a different one.
Is that milk?
I don't know, I think it's a
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, I think you're right.
But butcher, brewer, and baker are the ones that Adam Smith gives as an example. So what he says is, if Sam is a butcher, right, and I want sausage, right, I actually have a butcher. It's soy stitch on 52nd and Q. So I know a little bit more about them. They're on their third generation, right? So when I go and buy sausage, it's such an important family adventure to get good German mustard, get the right kind of sausage, all this kind of stuff, the right sliced meat. It has to be cut the right way because you can eat it for breakfast, it's not just for sandwich or lunch. So I know way too much about going to the butcher shop, right? Why? Because I go there frequently and I've gotten to know the butcher. In order to get the butcher to talk to me, tell me good deals, all that kind of stuff, get what I want, I've learned something about the butcher. So the best way to get Sam to do what I want to do is to know something about him. But through the process of knowing him, I actually learn something about him and I start to develop sympathies, right? I start to actually understand the positions that he holds that I also share, which is sort of the sympathetic mechanism. We have the things that we both feel strongly about that we have in common bond us. Now, it's bad if we both feel strongly about something and we disagree about it, that's a problem. But to the extent that we learn something about each other, where we start, I know about his family, he knows about my family, that actually creates sociability. And through the market process of exchange, we start to find out more about people in a broader sphere of interaction. Right? So if we cast wide nets to trade, the extent of the market expands. One of the weird occurrences about this is that we start to sympathize with others. Now, notice that this is exactly the opposite of what we said with the Greeks, right? They said the same process is in play. I start talking to Sam, and then I start knowing something about him, and it actually makes me less intense about my own unique idiosyncratic beliefs because I moderate towards his position because he offers alternative ways of seeing the world. For the Greeks, that was bad. For Smith, that is good. It extends sympathy. So how can we put this in the diagram? Just because I know you guys are econ majors, so it's like graphs, right? So let's draw a diagram here. So here's sympathy. All right, this is a degree of intensity along the scale of sympathy. Who do I feel sympathy for? Who do I know that I have the most in common with? And here's distance. Here's me. What's the exact opposite side of the world from one? I don't know. It's there.
Somewhere in the ocean.
There, right? Okay. And so here's like me. Here's like Omaha, Nebraska, the United States, Europe. Right? These are distances. Right? And I know more about people close to me, less about people further away from me. So, my natural state, before I'm corrected by any sort of interaction, is to have extremely strong sympathy for those close to me, and to have that sympathy decay rather quickly as I move away from them. There's no natural connection. If we're right, if Smith has a sympathetic mechanism built into his extension of our trade, our association with others in the market, then that sympathy is going to look more like this. I'm going to moderate. So what's this look like, right? What are some examples of how this might work? So my more extreme beliefs, I'm going to tamp down. My idiosyncratic beliefs, and I'm going to have a lot of weak ties. The Greeks thought this would be bad because what makes you Athenian might be idiosyncratic. It might be specialized to that particular culture or group. All right? So here's where I start worrying. Like, how would you apply this to an example where you could sort of get into what I'm thinking about? What kind of person eats at Chick-fil-A? Or shops at Target versus Walmart, or Walmart versus Target? How many people have a strong opinion about it? They feel more comfortable either Walmart or Target. I won't ask you which. Just right? And nobody else? Everybody else is like, I don't shop it either. Some kind of pro. So you have a strong preference about which which one you shop at, or you have a strong preference about who's selling you your sandwich. Right? That's the old side, it's the green one, the intense feelings of commitment. Right? And if you go there, then you're probably going to learn less about people that don't share your beliefs. So Smith's whole mechanism of sort of extending the market, getting out there and trading with other people and therefore developing sympathies, results only in the kind of world where you care a lot about getting a good deal on trading, right? And then through the back door comes this sort of sympathetic connection to a wide variety of people. You might think about, talking with people on discussion forums online, right? So you can be really mean online because you're unlikely to see those people face to face, right? You can also find a really interesting diversity of people to interact with that may share something in common with you. One of my friends in grad school would always go on the Smashing Pumpkin chat room. Very supportive people. He ended up marrying his wife. That's pretty niche, right? But he met people from all over the world. Shared a lot about the Smashed Pumpkin. I know the guy's actually.
So can you walk through that mechanism again? So you're saying that Smith says that we create these relationships first, we're looking for a good deal everywhere, and then
Sam's my butcher. I don't care anything about him. I walk into the store.
Right.
What do I have to do in order to get a good deal? If I want to know him well enough to get a good deal, or be like, this is sort of from the end of the tenderloin. You got me a deal on the smaller end of the tenderloin than on the fatty, right? And he's like, no, it's so much per weight or whatever. If I know him, right? If I know, what do I know about you that I'm not sharing? Or maybe it's something that I can borrow.
he has sweaters.
I do like sweaters.
I won't play rugby.
Yeah,
So
that's
you
right.
talk about
Yeah, so I start talking about rugby, and I'm like, like I stuff, and then I ask you the question again, and you're like, yeah, I can do that for you. Right? So to get him to understand my self-interest, I have to first know about him. Right? It's that process of imagining who he is as distinct from myself that creates the sympathy. And that investment can be self-interested in some sense, but it's a broad notion of self-interest because I genuinely learn and start to create affection for Sam as a result of our interactions. But because I'm truly learning something about someone distinct from myself, I weaken sort of my more extreme positions. So I weaken my extreme position. I go from the high grade to the lower grade, even though I still have a bias. Just weakening places. I'm aware of places. So here's an example, right? I would assume a lot of you didn't watch the State of the Union last night. You might have an opinion, or you might have an opinion of the president. How many people feel comfortable just talking about that out loud in this room? All right? In the last class, there was nobody saying this. But that's like a third rail. Politics, or especially more recent politics, is kind of a third rail, right? And you learn, not because, it's important to you, right? There's no reason to deny that. It's important to you. You care a lot about it. It's a priority to care about because it matters. But you censor yourself because you know that that's going to cause extreme disagreement because other people feel as intensely, have a high priority on that. These are the sort of technical things that Smith does to find out where we're going to have a lot of tension. You place a higher priority on it out of your preferences, and you have a very clear opinion, right? So if you meet somebody that has that same coincidence but disagrees with you, that's going to be bad. If you meet someone that feels intensely about it and agrees with you, that's great, it's bonding. So offline, you may talk to each other and bond over the fact that you can let your hair down metaphorically and talk about how you feel. If you start talking in public about your political opinions, you're probably going to find that people get upset. And you might self-censor. So the collective, the group, right, for fear of not knowing who's going to get upset or whatever, you tend to start tamping down some of your more extreme or disagreeable beliefs. So the idea would be, under what conditions do people do that in the market? under those conditions is that socializing. Right? So if we set up a restaurant where everybody who feels a certain way about politics eats that sandwich there, and nobody that disagrees with politics eats the sandwich there, then that's reinforcing the sort of idiosyncratic beliefs rather than tamping them down.
So is it that sympathy is so weaken our strong beliefs and that we like take their side and understand their side as like really valid and like, oh, I also agree with that actually, or is it that we sort of mask it because we're afraid that we'll be judged?
So Smith's system is that you have a man within the breast, which is conscience. Right? Just as a fancy way of saying it. So your conscience is informed by your experience. Right? But then when you join a group, that group has some sort of moderated view of that issue. Right? They're usually, your views tend to be the same on some things relative to the group you're in. And as that group interacts with the groups, or as that group size expands, it becomes more moderate over time. So it's all about tamping down the sort of extreme things, right? So he goes through all these examples. I mean, these are not directly relevant to economics, but maybe it'd be useful in thinking of it. But he talks about like when your father dies. What's the appropriate time to mourn? If you don't put on black, then that's probably a problem, right? You gotta mourn. But if 2 years afterwards, you're still walking around moping, and people are asking what's wrong, you're like, I'm still mourning my father. People get sick of it and they react to it rather harshly. There's a point at which mourning can be excessive and cause social problems. But it would also be completely wrong to take a stoic position and say, you know, somebody goes, I heard your dad died, are you okay? And you're like, dads die every day, I don't want to put wrong attention on something. That would also cause people to reject you, right? Because you're not appropriately caring for self, right? So there's a moderation. So what's important about Smith's system is that the sympathy is always biased, but the best place to find moderation for your bias is in groups. And he believes that as groups start to work together and get larger and larger trade, that those biases will be tamped down to the extreme, the most they can be. So then the market would be a place in which those types of things that sort of upset other people are less likely to occur.
Is it Smith who talks about if you knew you were going to lose your pinky?
Yep. He says that the proper way of doing that is for certain you would give up your pinky if you could save a million people in China. He says not many people would do it, but it's the right answer. And so the societies that have the right rules push us in that direction, where we're willing to self-sacrifice, because we recognize that that the demand that I survive and a million people perish is unreasonable from any sort of unbiased perspective. So beyond the groups, he imagines an impartial spectator. An example in last class that seemed to work is there's RCDC, which is the Russell Child Development Center, where my 2-year-old's currently at. If you walked over there and they were like all fighting and pushing each other, like I'd pretty much, like either Sam or Dale, you guys, if you intervened, it'd be unbiased, right? If you're not going to start taking sides or playing favorites, you don't know anybody over there. Maybe you figure out which one's my daughter, and you just treat her badly. Right? If you're completely outside of the group, if there's no reason to believe that you're playing favorites, then you're impartial. So he imagines sort of a stoic philosopher, or he doesn't say this, but I like to think of it as a guy on Mars with a telescope watching. Can't mess with it. It's not going to matter what he thinks, right? Or God. Right? God's unbiased. Your vision of God is my vision of God is God's unbiased. He wants the best for everybody. Right? So that's the appeal. But you inform the conscience by approximating the objective, the impartial.
The hope or like it's something to devil instead of like a butcher, the baker, or
Yeah.
we expect to do.
So that was the whole thing with Sam the butcher, right? So I appealed to him based on rugby, because I know he cares a lot about rugby. And I played rugby, so I know something about it, but he's played for a lot longer than me. But I can tell him how hard it was, and stuff, and how anybody can do it for 3 years, it's just tough. Alright, so how many people would be flattered by someone telling you you're strong when it's clearly not true?
That was a very good way of keeping people's feelings in check by high school.
Oh,
High
they're
school,
strong?
you would grab them and be like, oh, my bad. Or if they walk by, you would throw yourself into the locker room because they were too big. Supposed to humiliate them, so no.
You don't like that. Okay, so it is false flattery. And it
But
is a problem.
it works to keep the group together.
Because it's funny.
Yeah.
But, so you were in an all-boys school.
Well, one co-ed my freshman year, but we still did.
What about if somebody that you were interested in came up and said, you're so strong?
That would just be strange.
Right? You want to be flattered on things that you think are true, or at least that you could possibly believe are true, right?
I don't know. That's context specific. Out of nowhere. That'd be strange.
Right? But if someone's going to flatter you, they have to kind of know something about what you value about yourself. Right? So then my question is, and it's on the sheet here, if you live in a society with markets, is it true that you can just get away with random flattery? Right? So, these are not conspicuously, that's a really nice pencil case. Alright. Really, did you have the binder that comes with it?
No, I don't.
But it's got a protractor in it and everything. This brings back good memories. Because you can use the side of the protractor to draw graphs.
That is exactly why I have it.
And this side right here is perfect for utility curves. Constrained maximization. Now, if I flatter this enough, Laura's eventually going to ask me how much I want to pay for it, right? And if I was just lying, and I don't offer her very much, she knows I'm flattering. Does that make sense? So could markets actually constrain sort of random praise that isn't actually praising? Right? So if you flatter somebody's cow, they may offer to sell it, and then you're exposed. You're just being flattered. Right? So is it possible, one of the upsides of markets is that that people are actually more genuine in the context of exchange because they have to put in money with help. Right? So what makes something praiseworthy? All right, so here's where we get into sort of the tricky part of Smith, which is this group-based idea, right? So what Smith says, so both Mandeville and Smith talk about justice. Right? I specifically pointed out in Mandeville where he says, vice is beneficial found when it's by justice lived in battle. So justice is there. But it's not clear from anything, even if you spend a lot more time on Mandeville. He's got the big long poem, which would take you a while anyway, but then he's got 2 volumes of the book, of the Fable of the Bees, which spans commentary on, it's kind of like the rest of his life depending on the poem he's published. And all those essays are collected into the Fable of the Bees in 2 volumes. It's fun reading. If you like people, and he's writing kind of the same style as Jonathan Swift. So it's good stuff. But so Mandeville has justice. Smith, I think, says that Mandeville gives us no reason to understand how justice is formed. Smith tries to fix that. Justice is the thing that the impartial spectator will approve of. Right? So when you act in a way that is immediately brings sympathy, right? So if Sam is walking across the pedestrian wall out here, and you guys are playing catch, and a ball comes over and it's about to hit a kid in the head, and he reaches out and grabs it barehanded, right? You think that's pretty cool. Right? I'm thinking of these things because for fun, I watch YouTube videos of dads doing amazing things to save their children. That's kind of cool. Right? Like they're on a sled and he grabs one with the sled right before it gets into the wall or something. So those things are really cool. They're praiseworthy, right? Because they seem to be just completely what any impartial person would approve of. Right? So that's the standard of justice. Now that's pretty loose, pretty hard. And what I want to emphasize about this is that so friendship is one of those things, but we don't know exactly what friendship is. This is vanity. That's the opposite. Right? Even a baby that spent too much time looking in the mirror, you just kind of judge, right? And this is easy. Right? Somebody that would rather just look at themselves on a date. Anybody been on a date and the person didn't make eye contact, they just were on their phone the whole time? You guys still have breeds? I put my foot in my mouth a couple of years ago because I was trying to be up and I used the phrase Netflix and chill. So I stopped trying to pick up cool things. I thought I literally meant watching movies, but that's not what I mean. Everybody turned red, so I'm like, yeah, it's not coming. But in groups, you develop these senses, right, of what an impartial person would approve of. So like I said, the bigger the group consensus is probably closer to the impartial consensus. And Smith told a whole long story about how, in your clan, you're going to have certain standards, but then clans get together in a modern society, we don't break off into small groups that are isolated, but we start to trade with each other, and that gives us a much better picture of what is sort of the impartial position. Alright, so markets, in this sense, if the two books are connected, would extend this idea of the impartial spectator by expanding the scope of trade and making this, through our own self-interest to begin with, just take on the position of others. So, there's ways you can read sort of current events this way, right? There are things that used to be acceptable that are no longer acceptable because we just have a broader sympathetic awareness. We understand that some things are going to affect other people, so we don't do them anymore. Even if maybe 10 years ago nobody would have thought about it. Or in 1984, certain things were okay, but they're no longer okay. So the reason you would explain that is the sympathetic gradient is extended because we just are more likely to trade with a diverse group of people. All right, so here's Smith on Mandeville. What exactly goes wrong? Well, in a nutshell, Smith doesn't like Mandeville because he sees Mandeville promoting vanity. So the piece that Mandeville is missing is vanity. Vanity would help distinguish between what's virtue and vice. I think this is probably right. So this is a strict critique of Mandeville's logic and his argument. So it's erroneous not because any one thing that Mandeville said was wrong, it's erroneous because there's nothing in it that would tell you what personal virtue is. So if private vice works to the public benefit, that's fine, but it didn't mean that it equaled personal virtue. And it seems like the system that Mandeville sort of is hinting at or squinting, at through a foggy lens is a system where people have lots of private virtue. Right? That there's some mechanism that rewards private virtue. Without that, the whole Mandevillian system breaks down. I think that's the opinion. So let's look at this system. There is, however, another system which seems to take away altogether the distinction between vice and virtue. All right? Now, he's not saying public virtue, private virtue, which one he's talking about. He's just saying, look, what Mandeville has done is just erode the distinction. And of which tendency is, upon that account, wholly pernicious. That's pretty clear. Though the notions of this author are in almost every respect erroneous, right, flawed, incomplete, there are, however, some appearances in human nature which, when viewed in a certain manner, seem at first sight to favor them. These described and exaggerated by the lively and humorous, but coarse and rustic eloquence of Dr. Mandeville have thrown upon his doctrine an air of truth and probability, which is very apt to impose on the unskillful. There's a lot in here, right? But what he's saying is that Mandeville took no care to distinguish what private virtue is. Now, one of the main things in Smith, I think, that becomes clear, the unskillful are people that are not educated to care about private virtue. So one of the problems with Smith's system, in my opinion, is that he assumes people seek after private virtue because it's beautiful, because it's its own reward. So that what we're going to get when we go into a market system or into a social group is more and more of this virtue, because it's what socializes us, it's what gives us the best options, it's what makes it nice to go out and meet other people and get to know them. Because humanity needs other people, we're going to seek other people in genuine and praiseworthy sorts of relationships. Right? The whole sort of system that Smith is promoting is that through this sort of system of interacting with more and more people, it's going to be civilizing, it's going to be seen as virtuous. And all of this depends on what kind of education people are getting about how to seek virtue. Smith is going to keep coming back to education. So a lot of people in this course in the past have written on what's required of education in order to have sort of a market order. Mill also picks this up and says that education. So I'll try to finish up today, but we might run over to a little bit on Monday in our review session, but I'll talk about education and how that comes up in Smith's second book, Wealth of Nations. Here's Wealth of Nations. All right, so if you're going to make a firm distinction between the two books and you think the author is consistent between the two, then what you have to do is say that there's a different sphere, a different scope of inquiry in the Wealth of Nations. So this is the book, this is an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. So I'm saying that what distinguishes this sphere is the looking at a larger group, nations, and then talking about growth. So again, we're going back to Professor Thomas's favorite theme of accumulating capital and increasing productivity, which shows up in Smith. So labor makes all things possible. Notice we've taken a turn from the physiocrats at this point. We're no longer talking about land as the primary input. We're saying something about labor, and I think that's really interesting because you can see the humanism in Smith. Like, he doesn't want to start from a source of value that's sort of an input of material resources. He's starting with human being as his source. He's talking about labor. So this begins to ask questions about why is labor productivity different? Is it just access to capital? And he starts to get into things which we might lump under human capital accumulation, skills of the people that are working. So by focusing on labor, a new set of questions come up. Right? That's the real part where the value is different. So labor makes all things possible. We want two things. We want stuff. And we want convenience, that's his word. That's like leisure and relaxing and stuff like that. So if you just want to eat, then you would work less than you currently work. Right? So everybody wants stuff, the stuff to take care of their needs, and so we want to accumulate. We want more than we absolutely have to have. That's one of his statements here in the introduction to the Wealth of Nations. So that's what's going to drive us to accumulate. So he's saying this is part of how we are as humans. We want to accumulate. All right, so there's two things that matter. One is management of those labor resources. So we can look across different groups, look across different nations, and see who's managing resources better. Right? In other words, where is the productivity coming from? This is just the efficiency question. We can also look and see how many resources are simply not being used or idle. In labor, we tend to call this unemployment, but you can also talk about idle resources of land, idle resources of capital, or tools. For most, in the next several weeks at least, when I talk about capital, I just mean things that augment labor productivity, which are at this point just tools, rakes, plows, machines with wheels, and pulleys, and things like that. Those are tools that make the labor more productive. It's when we get into finance that we talk about fungible capital, that is money. everybody comes in thinking that's what capital is, so I just like it. The reason it's called capital is because it was originally just tools. Alright. So what he says is that if you get the management right, then the productivity goes up of all of the employed factors, land, labor, capital. And then the opportunity cost of the unemployed factors increases, meaning people will just start using unused land, unused tools, unused labor. So the way to do this is just to focus on growth. Growth will take care of the other problem. Now, I might have heard that in macro, that's at least one side of the macro puzzle. When you taught this with growth strategy. Okay, so what are ways that people have managed the problem of surplus population in the past? So if you have too many people, if you're smart, right, you can try to do something about that. Well, to the extent that anyone's ever seen labor as a resource throughout history, the most common way they've seen it is sort of cannon fodder, right? Ways to use people to acquire territory and influence. This kind of makes sense because if you're recognizing the population is growing beyond what you can feed domestically, you don't have trade as an option, at least at the scale necessary to make an impact. So what you're going to do is you're going to put them in the field and try to go and either get more territory or solve the problem because there's fewer people at the end of the conflict than there was at the beginning. He also points to the fact that societies have had policies where they have killed infants and the elderly. These are extreme, but he talks about infant exposure in Rome, he talks about infant exposure in China. So what he would say is, look, this is these types of things, war, killing infants and the elderly, what he doesn't talk about, but I would add a similar thing to, is human sacrifice on a massive scale in South America, South and Central America. These are, just from a totally realist position, ways to deal with overpopulation. I'm not recommending this. Right? But what Smith is saying is that those are products of a society that has somehow failed to understand labor as a resource, that you can increase labor productivity and grow. So it's a pretty sharp contrast, right? I'm giving you a pretty optimistic version of advancing economies. Is that this turn that we made to try to grow wealth and become richer upset a previous equilibrium that was dominated by war, famine, disease, human sacrifice in some areas, infanticide, and killing of the elderly. So these are things that he's trying to get a break out of, see labor as a resource rather than a cost or a problem to be dealt with. Does that make sense? If you're a sovereign in a nation, the population is growing beyond what you think the land will support, there's something going to happen. Let the pressure off, right? The alternative to this is to see labor as a resource and to try to increase labor productivity such that the overall resources grow. All right. So what he's saying is that for a large part of history, there's been subsistence workers and a very small fraction of people that had about 10 times the food that everybody else had. That's kind of a magnitude, it's an order of magnitude difference between subsistence and being rich. And that was the real deal. If you're wealthy, you had way too much, everybody else had way too little. So what he wants to rest his case on in this book is then the idea that the poor in a rich country are going to be better than the poor in a poor country. It's not just that the rich get richer, it's that it has to be the case for his system to make sense, for his justification, for his validation to make sense for this method he's proposing, that the poor in a richer country are better than the poor in a poorer country. Smith sort of puts this on the introduction. John Stuart Mill will continue this when we get to him talking about the society can only be measured in progress by the progress of the least amount of law. So here's the recommendations after the introduction. Book 1 deals with improvement in productive power. That's the management issue or the efficiency part. Book 2 is talking about capital stock. We won't spend as much time on book 2, 3, and 4. I won't very much mention anything other than this. Book 3 is about town versus rural areas. As you're trying to understand where a town comes from in the beginning of the division of labor, he takes you through sort of the first market town, where they have markets twice a year, how that became more permanent, and the division of labor expanded, and all the sort of social things that happen as a result. And then he talks about the system of governance, all the different factors that are moving within the nation that's developing more and more internal trade. And then he talks about sort of the development of the legal and political system of book 5. We'll talk a little bit more about that one. We'll spend a lot of time on book 1, or the majority of our time on book 1. All right, so book 1 is the management of the resources. We can just call this efficiencies. What do I mean by that? All right, so we talked about the division of labor. So the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. That's the title of chapter 3 and book 1. What does that mean? If I were from to get multiple choice tests, then this would be a very multiple choice question. What is the division of labor extent of the market gives you choices? So the more people that you can trade with, the more people that can buy your product, the more options you have to buy, that's the extent of the market. But then this allows for specialization, right? As people develop more and more options, there's a famous article in economics talking with this title that talks about how as cars came up, buggy whip manufacturers sort of collapsed, and there was only one producer of buggy whips, right? Because there weren't that many. I mean, they still have horses, right? They still have buggies. And there are places that buggies perform better, where there aren't roads. So there's still a demand for it, but there's not as much division. So in fact, you saw like one company, not only so they kind of vertically integrated, they stopped making just the final product, but made all of the pieces as well, because there just wasn't a big enough market to sustain a division of labor. So you saw this in reverse in that move. So in other words, the larger the market, the larger the pool of consumers for your product, the more specialized your production is going to get. So why would we want specialization? Well, we want specialization because if I sat there and I did one thing all day long, I'd get better at it. Another thing is, if I do one thing all day long, then I'm not switching between things I'm doing. So if you're thinking about an assembly line, the way to think about it is to say, I put the tool down, move over here, I pick the other tool up, do that part, put that tool down, move over here. The back and forth every second between operations is wasted, where I could just stand in one spot and do the same operation over and over again. If the assembly line doesn't work for you, think about doing tasks on a very small farm versus a large farm. In a small farm, you might have to go slop the pigs and plow the field with the horses. And walking between those 2 points is all wasted time. Where if you're in a larger farm, you might have one person doing each of those tasks. So you literally save time in the process of communication between one task and the other. Second advantage of specialization. The third is really interesting and related to the first, which is some labor is really, really annoying. So the human mind starts coming up with very creative ways to get out of labor, because it's really annoying to do the same thing all the time. So it's the process of putting people in the task, specialized task, that creates innovation. All right, so his example is a little boy at a steam engine who opens one valve, closes the other, closes that valve, opens the other. All right, so he's standing there all day doing this thankless task on a steam engine. So there's not very much money, and he'd like to go play a game. So this says a game, I can only assume it's soccer because they're in England. Right? So rather than playing with the valves, he wants to run outside and play. So he ties a string between the two, because they're offset. So they open and close on their own now. Well, that's the principle that is behind the cam valve, which is opening and closing valves at different intervals. So, this may be just a random example. I mean, Adam Smith knew James Watt, who perfected the steam engine, so he probably spent a lot of time around engines. But he just gives us an example of a kid operating an engine that wanted to get out of work and came up with a really easy solution that no one else saw. There's the word stop, right? It was bad word. All right, so that's Smith's claim about innovation. We'll get to the point in book 5 where we respond to that, because you may not think that they always innovate. You may think some really boring tasks stick around way too long. So what do we do in that case? But this is a system where you constantly get more productivity because you come up with really routinized labor and then you eliminate it. And that's all productivity advance. More output in the same number of inputs, everybody gets wealthier. Okay, so Smith walks into a pin factory. So what I want you to imagine is walking with Smith, standing on the balcony of the pin factory. This picture is from Greenwood's Encyclopedia. Smith takes the example from this French. They tried to get an encyclopedia that have all of human knowledge in it. They knew it would be long. They eventually gave up. But the whole task was to sort of assemble all of human knowledge. But what they were going to do is, what Smith asked you to sort of do is imagine yourself on the balcony of the print factory, standing there with the person who owns the factory. And they're telling you, look, what we figured out is the wire comes in, we're going to, straighten the wire, we're going to cut it in certain lengths, we're going to sharpen one end, we're going to take some piece, make a head, we're going to put that on the pen, right? Now I should probably tell you what a pen is. A lot of people think that when I say pen, I'm saying this thing. I'm not. I'm just from Mississippi. And so this is a pen, and the thing you stick through your clothes is also a pen. Drive my wife crazy. So you don't even know English. So the pen that they stuck through their clothes could have held on like a nosegay, right? Like so you're walking through streets with sewage on them, so it's not pleasant. So you put flowers on your coat so that when you're outside you can walk like this. Or you can hold something fancy on your hat or something, mark a distinction, put a little spray or something on your hat. But pens were kind of nice, they dressed things up. It was a nice way to turn drab clothing into something a little bit more. It used to be, by the Elizabethan period, it was something only the nobility had. By the time you divide it up, I think you increase the production of pens by using a division of labor something like 40-fold, 40 times, I think is his description. Which meant that the actual input cost of the labor, which is the largest cost of most production processes, had fallen so much that everybody could buy pens. Maybe a modern example, a more modern example. Joseph Schumpeter talks about how in a factory in the 1940s, a factory girl working to the machines that produce stockings, or nylon stockings, could now afford those stockings, whereas in Victoria's time, 100 years earlier, only the nobility could afford stockings. Right? Even the people working at the factory would have never been able to wear those stockings. So I don't know if that appeals to anybody. But the idea is that through the specialization and division of labor, much more is available to everyone. Not only in terms of producing more, but it just brings down the cost of everything so that more people can afford it. The market is much more expanded. All right, so you're standing on the balcony watching this process explain about how the division of labor works. So then Smith asks you to take a higher position, stand up outside of the economy, and look at how a woolen coat is made. Everybody seen a peacoat before? Wool coat? Naval peacoat? So all of the things that go into it do not fit neatly into one factory. You have to graze sheep. You have to you have to shear the sheep. You have to, create yarn. You have to sew the yarn into cloth. You have to cut the cloth. You have to sew the cloth. Then he goes, and nobody really produces buttons. buttons for this. We buy the buttons internationally. Where would the person who coordinated all of this activity actually stand to observe it? It's easy in the pen factory to see it happening. Where do you stand when you're thinking about something as common? Right? He's looking at his window, people are walking by every minute in a Pico because he's in Scotland, right? In 1776, or a little before. Watching everybody walk around the Picos. So this very common thing, no one coordinated. It's as if some manager of a factory is standing there coordinating everything, but it's not. Right? There's something here. Now, that's what gives way to this idea of the invisible hand. We talked a little bit about how to think about the invisible hand. There's a lot of different interpretations of it. What I've tried to do is say it's the manager just sort of sitting there, but the manager has become so abstract that it's not functional to think of that person as sitting in a particular place or just not existing at all. So that Adam Ferguson's idea of human action but not of human design is nobody really put that scheme of design together. It's just the rules were running. Right? So what I want to be very careful in saying is that there are a set of rules where within those rules people can coordinate to make things as if they were coordinated on purpose, although no one ever did it. There's a set of property rights, there's a set of legal remedies, all that kind of stuff that would have that happen. So at that point, we're kind of at our first test in the sense of what we've said Smith explained. The rest of the course is sort of, okay, so what are those rules, right? And can you actually do that, right? Can you have a sense of harmony that just sort of arises once you get the rules right? I think Smith thinks yes, but I just want to say that's where we're at in the course with that answer. So that's kind of where we're stopping for the invisible hand. The invisible hand is supposed to be the idea of coordinating others within a system of rules. All right, so people are interested principally in others, but we don't appeal to them on benevolence, but to their self-interest. This is the butcher, brewer, and baker part. So which is it? Is this fundamentally a problem? Is this a contradiction? Have I convinced you that there's some sort of thread that runs through these? All right, so here's the butcher and baker. It's not from benevolence, the butcher, the brewer, the baker, and respect our government, but from regard to their own interests. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Okay. All right, so part A is the part that always gets quoted. I think it's interesting that this is all part of the same paragraph. Part B is just furthering the same exact paragraph. And I'll put part of this paragraph on your handout for today, in case you don't want to look up here. So part B. Nobody but a beggar chooses to depend chiefly on the benevolence of his fellow citizens. Even a beggar does not depend upon it entirely. The charity of well-disposed people indeed supplies him with the whole of his subsistence. But though this principle ultimately provides him with all the necessities of life which he has the occasion for, it neither does nor can provide him with all that he has with them as he has occasion for them. The greater part of his occasional wants are supplied in the same manner as those of other people, by treaty, by barter, and by purchase. With the money which one man gives him, he purchases food. The old clothes, which another bestows on him, he exchanges for other old clothes, which suit him better. He's unrelated with other beggars, right? Beggars get together and trade clothes to see what fits better, right? Or lodging, right? Somebody might be willing to take clothes for lodging, or for food, or for money, with which he can buy either food, clothes, or lodging as he has occasion. So what's important here is that Smith is doing a type of analysis that is very Smithian, very unique to Smith, which is I'm going to apply the same criteria of trade to everyone, right? Everyone, even the recipient of charity, is thinking from this self-interested position, and how can I better my position through trade? And that charity itself is an imperfect mechanism that can be improved by trade. The recipients of charity trade with one another to better their position. So this is probably what frustrates you, right? You go down and you see somebody on the street and you're like, you were raised right, so you believe everybody that you give money to is just going to buy whiskey, right? Or buy things. Right? Isn't that the reason you don't give money? They're just going to spend it on alcohol? I mean, if you're a good, proper utilitarian, you don't care whatever makes them happy, whatever increases yields, so you just give them what they want. But if you've got some other appeal, some other sense of justice, and it'll be proper expenditure of money, you might say, I'll go buy them a sandwich. I once bought peanuts for somebody, and I smiled and said, thanks, but I haven't eaten. I felt really, really bad. And I didn't want the peanuts back. Right? The logic was peanuts are pretty wholesome, right? But, so hopefully she traded them away. But this idea that you can somehow know what the person wants or what's going to make them better off motivates sort of a preference over what you give someone. But then it frustrates you because they're willing to trade it, right? So if somebody goes and trades a sandwich for a sip of a vodka bottle, is that going to piss you off? Or is that just trade? Right? Do you allow them to make the same choices that the rest of people make? Or are you somehow saying that they're different than you and therefore need more paternalism? What's really interesting about Smith's approach is that he's seeing everybody from the same lens. All human beings trade to improve their situation. It's just universal to humanity. Everyone's the same. This is what some of my friends have called analytical egalitarianism. It's not egalitarianism with respect to everybody's going to get the same thing. It's egalitarianism is we're going to enforce strongly the fact that everyone is more similar than they are different, which follows directly from Smith's belief in sympathy, I believe. So here is where I would say, if you're following what I'm arguing, sometimes it's late in the day for me, so maybe I'm not making sense, but if you're following what I'm saying, this is a direct application of sympathy. The idea of treating every person as an agent to make decisions to improve their own well-being. And he's not saying that there's no place for charity. He's just saying, look, people will trade even when they're recipients of charity. All right, so there's a video here. I'm not going to waste your time playing in class, but you can see that. So here's what I want to really emphasize. Recall that I brought up this term catalyzing. Here's the second time it's coming up. It came up under the Greek system where we needed Greek words to provide different ways of seeing the market. But if you see the market through this catalactic lens, which Archbishop Leahy will put a firm point on it, because he mentioned this and developed this term particularly, then you're going to start thinking about what Smith is doing in a slightly different way. Here's our taxonomy that we've come up with, right? Rocks are alive, plants are alive, they don't have a soul, animals have a soul, humans have reason. Within humans, they're slave and master in the Greek system, right? The analytical egalitarian approach just answers to all humans. Okay? It's important in terms of whether or not you think there's hierarchy. There's a big thread throughout all of economics whether or not there's a hierarchy between agents. And the Smithian lens, the Smithian tradition, absolutely refuses that. Maybe even as a source of error, I don't know, right? You gotta decide. It refuses those sorts of distinctions. Right? So it's anti-paternalism. All right? So then, what I get from this, because when you read the chapter about trade and two dogs, this is the beginning of that same sort of section, two dogs never trade a bone, like for like. You never see them say, this is mine, that's yours, I'd like to trade. It's great. I'm just going to get whatever's available. So animals don't do this. Animals also, may appeal in terms of affection towards one each other and try to cozy up against each other, but they don't make contracts. So what Smith seems to be saying is, let's take this Aristotelian sort of taxonomy, and let's say that one of the applications of reason that is unique to man is this extremely developed propensity to truck, barter, and exchange, which even if present in pigeon monkeys and ravens and things like that, is manifesting at a much higher level. All right, so the propensity to truck, barter, and exchange would be the difference in human nature than that of its animal or primary capacity. If you really get exercised by this distinction, put your paper on it. In fact, there is no in-kind difference between human sociability and animal sociability with respect to trade. There's a lot of stuff out there on that, so it'd be a good paper. But applying this particular form of reason with mankind defines their purpose, right? In other words, you'll often hear me say it's problem worthy of the human mind, right? So solving a complex issue of social dynamics, coming up with a policy solution that actually works for everybody involved, that's a problem worthy of the human mind. Coordinated human action. Here's my street corner philosopher example. The philosopher is from Charlie Kinnaman. I like to Bob a little bit because he's a big philosopher. The other guy's a pizza deliverer, so I sometimes use garbage man, I sometimes use pizza deliverer. These are both entry level jobs that require a ton of skills. To be Charlie Kinnaman, you have to read a lot of books. A lot of books that are hard to find, you go to libraries and things like that. What's the difference? Essentially nothing other than habit, right? This is another form of strictly analytical egalitarianism. And maybe Charlie has a higher IQ, but high IQ is not the only secret sauce of making a philosopher. You actually have to work hard. And working hard and developing the habits and doing the types of things philosophers do, and the difference in maybe Charlie was a pizza man when he was a teenager. The difference is how he's applied his time since then, not his IQ. The IQ is something we don't have control of. We like to emphasize it in ways that oversell the difference. Ooh, I was going to thought I would get a zoomed in picture of this. Mutually beneficial exchange. The idea of catalaxy that will develop is that catalaxy fundamentally brings people into proper relationship. Right? That there are types of trade that actually accomplish this. That actually are voluntary, that actually are, you're better off, I'm better off. I know you guys know of trades where someone's worse off after the trade. Right? The idea was to use reason to set up the trade so that it is truly better off. One of my friends, Michael Munger, who's in that video that I skipped over, has come up with the term voluntary, which is to say absolutely, strictly, mutually beneficial, not in some sort of like sneaky way voluntary. And so what's the difference between saying you can starve to death or work in a sweatshop or your money or your life? And is there any strict difference? Is that truly voluntary? Most people do not see that as truly voluntary, so we have to have a special sphere within voluntary trade, which we call voluntary, which means that both people come to it. If you want to, I think I put it on the sheet for maybe the Greeks, under the Greeks, it's the BATNA, the best alternative to the negotiated agreement. That's the Kennedy School's version of spelling this out. When is it actually voluntary? It's when the person you're trading with doesn't have just one option in the trade. That's not a fair trade. Mutually beneficial trade. That's more like the money we want. All right, who's going to present today? Okay, I'll get up. I'll sit down.
So we talked a lot at the beginning of the class